So the development of the Hebrew Bible is pretty complex, but in short, there were a lot of traditions, a lot of poetry, some legal texts that began to be written down between around 800 BCE and down to around 300 BCE. And as they're being written, they're being collected, they're being redacted and edited, and they're coming together into this corpus of texts. Now, most scholars these days would probably say that it's not until around the middle of the 2nd century BCE, around the rise of the Hasmonean kingdom. So this is the Maccabees. This is the story of the rededication of the temple that Hanukkah is based on. But before that time, there were a lot of Jewish folks who weren't speaking Hebrew anymore. They were speaking Greek because mainly they were the ones who were living in Alexandria in Egypt. In the late 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great sweeps through all of this area, takes it over, and then as his successors are fighting for control of these regions, the land is Hellenized, meaning that Greek becomes kind of the lingua franca. This is what, if you want to engage in international business and sometimes even business between one city and another, usually a type of Greek is going to be the language of wider communication. And so a lot of Jewish folks are living in Egypt and Alexandria. They're living elsewhere where people are being raised speaking Greek as their native language, not Hebrew. Now, Hebrew is still being spoken.
So it wasn't a dead language.
It wasn't a dead language. That I don't know where on earth that idea comes from, because we have letters and inscriptions and things in Hebrew all the way down past the life of Christ.
Yeah, what does that even mean, a dead language? How can a language be dead? What does that mean?
So if people are growing up learning a language as their first language, and then they're out there using it in public discourse, the language evolves. So you get new words are brought in, old words change their meaning, you get changes.
Semantic drift, right?
That's one of the things that can happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that can happen, but once a language is no longer being learned as a first language and is not being used in public discourse, when it's limited only to texts or rituals or things like that, then you don't have that continued change and evolution. And at that point, they tend to refer to a language that it's frozen, it's not changing at all. They will usually refer to that as a dead language.
I get it.
So like Latin, for instance, nobody learns Latin as their first language. There are people who can speak it fairly fluently, but it's limited to usually liturgical things and rituals and things like that. So we're not building the Latin vocabulary. The syntax is not changing. You don't have old guys going, in my day, we use that Latin word to mean this, and the kids these days, they're...
Understood.
You don't have that kind of thing. So they used to think that Hebrew was more or less a dead language by the time of Jesus, and that most everybody spoke Aramaic, but there's a growing contingent. I would say it's probably, if not about 50% of scholars, probably even more than that, think that
Greek?
Hebrew was still quite
Hebrew.
active. Yeah. Now most people think Jesus probably spoke some degree of Greek. I think it was probably some marketplace Greek. Like the way that I can speak modern Greek. I can't hold a conversation. I can't argue with somebody in Greek, but I can find my way to the restaurant or I can buy or sell what I need. So that was, and Sepphoris was right over the hill from Nazareth. So if he was doing any work for people who were living in Sepphoris or something like that, growing up as a Mason or whatever he was, then he probably would have picked up some Greek. But there's debate about the degree to which Hebrew was a living language around the time of Jesus. But I think most scholars would say it was probably still a living language, although Aramaic and Greek were the more common languages of wider communication. Now, when the Septuagint was translated, Hebrew was very much still a living language. That was probably around 250 to 100 BCE. You have the process of translating the Septuagint. There's an old tradition from a text that scholars usually call Pseudo-Aristeas about the king in Egypt wanting translations of all the laws of the world. And so he calls sends some people to Jerusalem, and they bring back 72 elders, 6 from all the 12 tribes of Israel, and they are locked up in towers, and they each translate the entire Torah into Greek, and they all come together at the end, and miraculously, all 72 translations match word for word. And so that's the legend about the translation of the Septuagint. The reality is that the books were translated by different people over the course of a few centuries, and there were some versions that were probably more popular than others. And by around the turn of the era, so the end of the 1st century BCE, beginning of the 1st century CE, around the birth of Jesus, there was probably a set of kind of more or less standard translations of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And one of the reasons that we know that this is a translation is because, for instance, the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, each of the books has a different translation profile. Like, some of the books are more literal, some of the books are less literal. Some have certain habits that they do in translating certain Hebrew things, others have other habits. And so when you look at all 5 of them together, there's no way this is an original composition. It has to be a translation. And
you're talking about the Septuagint.
Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation. When we look at the Hebrew, there is some distinctiveness from book to book, but as we kind of drill down to the foundation of this distinctiveness, what we get is the different source texts, the different sources for these traditions. So Genesis was probably composed separately from Exodus. Deuteronomy was composed separately. We have what's called the priestly source, which is adding layers to several of the books of the Pentateuch. The Holiness Code is an even later portion of the priestly source that is responsible for things in Leviticus and things like that. So, but there's a consistency that is related to the type of Hebrew that we see being used outside of the Bible. So in the inscriptions, in the letters, the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were a lot of biblical texts, but there were a lot of other texts that were discovered there as well that aren't part of the Bible, part of other apocryphal, pseudepigraphical books, but other things that were unique to that community that was living in Qumran. And there's nothing in there. Well, so we have Hebrew, some Aramaic, and some Greek texts that were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's nothing in the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls that indicates it's being translated from Greek. All of the data point in the other direction, that is going from Hebrew to Greek. And in one of the videos, I pointed out that, for instance, you have these idioms that exist in Hebrew that don't exist in Greek, not classical Greek, not the Koine.
Can you explain what an idiom is?
An idiom is something where, like, it doesn't, the semantic content of a given set of words isn't the sum of the whole.
Like a butterfly?
Well, that's a single word, but a common one you hear these days is, in 1,000 years, they won't know the difference between a butt dial and a booty call. Right. Because butt and booty are synonyms, dial, call are kind of synonyms. It doesn't exactly work, but those are things where you combine words in a way that has a specific kind of semantic impact that you might not be able to decipher just from looking at the words themselves.
Got it. Okay.
And so in the thesis I wrote at Oxford, I was looking at Exodus 24:10, and this is the story of Moses goes up Sinai with all of the elders, and it says, "Vayeru et Elohei Israel," and they saw the God of Israel. And the text goes on to say there was like a sapphire paving under his feet, and they sat down and they ate there. In the Greek, it doesn't say that. It says they saw the place where the God of Israel stood, but it's.
So you're saying there's way more detail in the Hebrew?
Well, no. The point here is that there's a difference between what the Hebrew's saying and what the Greek's saying, but the Greek is not phrased how you would normally phrase that in Greek. So it actually says they saw the place which God stood there, and so the which and the there are an odd way that's not natural Greek. But it exactly matches something called a resumptive pronoun that is used in Hebrew, where you would say, stood asher for which, amad, he stood, sham, there. And so what it shows is that the Greek translator is translating very literally, so much so that it doesn't make a ton of sense in Greek. But if you know Hebrew, you could be like, oh, I see, it's doing this Hebrew thing.
Interesting.
And so there's, I'm trying to think of some English examples of like translationese where something's, well, I guess just saying they saw the place which he stood there. That doesn't make a lot of sense in English. But a Hebrew speaker would be able to see, oh, I see what you're doing. That's something that we do in Hebrew with this resumptive pronoun and adverb.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that Amon pointed out to me when he was trying to make a case for the Greek being original was that the ancient Greek has like 1.5 million unique words, and the ancient Hebrew only has 8,000 unique words. And he was explaining to us, he was showing us the differences, and there was like, for one word in Greek, when you translate it to Hebrew, there's like 3 or 4 words just to equal that one word in Greek.
So there's a couple of things there. One, there's nowhere near that many Greek words. There are ancient Greek. You've got, I think, 275,000 is the estimate, more or less, of how many ancient Greek words there are. If you look at all Greek, ancient, medieval, and modern, you've got 400,000 to 500,000. And
what's that lexicon website where we can actually look it up?
Thesaurus Linguae Graeca.
Yeah. Okay.
TLG.
Can you find the TLG and is there a way you can just search for unique words in a certain language and it'll tell you?
You have to have an account, I think, to do the most robust kind of search with that.
Oh, do you?
But I think you should be able to do some pretty basic stuff.
Okay. See what you can find, Stephen. Okay. Anyways, you can keep going.
And then there are 79,945 words in Hebrew in the Hebrew Bible alone. So
79,000?
79,000, yeah. So I think he may have heard 80,000 somewhere.
Oh, 8. He said 8.
Yeah, I think he may have mistook 80 for 8 because the Hebrew Bible itself, which is not all of ancient Hebrew, like there was a lot of Hebrew writing and speaking outside the Hebrew Bible, but the Hebrew Bible itself has 80,000 different words in it. But when it comes to translation, there are a lot of different ways that between one language and another, one word may need a whole phrase in another language.
Yes.
But at the same time, in that language, there may be another word that needs 2 or 3 words in the other language.
It's just it's just wild. Like, it's bizarre that let's just say what you're saying is true, and it's 80,000 in Hebrew and it's only 250,000 in Greek. The fact that you need 4 like multiple Hebrew words to match one Greek word is like pretty wild.
I think more frequently you need more Greek words. Greek uses articles a lot more frequently. Like you don't just say Jesus in Greek, you say the Jesus. So if you were just speaking in Hebrew or Aramaic, you would just say Yeshu or something like that, and you wouldn't have to use the article. And Greek is a much more systematic language than Hebrew. Hebrew is a lot more vibes going on in Hebrew. You kind of have to just get a sense for how things are being used. But also in Hebrew, things get packed together into individual words. So you can have your direct objects tacked onto the word. You can have the definite article tacked onto the word. And so if you're looking at a text, you may only be looking at one word, but it could be he did the thing. It could be 3 different words in English.